Okay, let's start our big event for today. Welcome, everyone. Uh, our next big event for Bentham is top to bottom success tips for the whole research cycle. And this is a topic that people often ask us about. What are some general tips to help researchers through various stages of the research cycle? Usually we focus on one particular stage. Maybe it's writing your manuscript, or it's preparing or journal selection, or promoting your research after publication. But tonight we're going to cover some of Professor Dyke's top tips from start to finish as you go through the hamster wheel of the research cycle. Professor Dyke, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Very, very well. Thank you, Scott. How are you? Everything's springtime here in Budapest. How about you? How are you? Everything okay?
Everything's great. It might be warmer there than here in Tokyo, so enjoy that lovely spring weather. And no matter where you are in the world joining us today, our guests, we hope that it's nice where you are today. Professor, this is an important topic, I think, this overview of the entire research cycle, and you've got a lot of great tips for us tonight. Is there anything that you'd like us to keep in mind as we go through this entire research cycle?
Yeah, well, we'll go through the cycle. Specifically to keep in mind, I think really we encourage people to have a journal in mind before you get going writing your paper, but also we're going to be thinking about impact. We're going to be thinking about how to prepare your work for successful publication, and also how to make sure it has the maximum impact after publication. And do let us know where you're from, by the way. I'm in Hungary, Scott's in Japan. Here it's mid-morning, there it's the evening. But where are you? Let us know in the chat where you're from and where you're joining us from today.
Yes, please do. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from, and also bonus points if you tell us your research field, any projects you might be working on. We're always excited to hear from researchers, no matter where you are. And also keep in mind that Professor Dyke, as always, is kindly offering his time to answer your questions. So if you have any burning questions from any topics that come up tonight during Gareth's talk, feel free to post them in the Q&A panel. I'll be just working together with you, engaging in the chat, going through your questions. I'll answer any questions that I can. And if there are any other burning questions, we'll be happy to answer them at the end of the event today. And Professor Dyke, as always, he is a fountain of information. And we've done a lot of these events together, but I always learn a lot from him on these events. So Professor Dyke, thanks as always for your time.
Wonderful.
And yeah, I'm excited to kick off this event today. Anything else before we begin today, Professor? Let's introduce our partners at Bentham Science to begin with.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got people from Croatia, India, Malaysia. That's very early. Thank you for joining us from Malaysia. Wales, of course. Javier, how you doing? Pakistan. Wow, Ethiopia, Iraq. Fantastic, fantastic. Pakistan, great. Do let us know. Do let us know. Scott, Bentham Science. Why are they such a great partner? Why are they such a great publisher for researchers?
Well, it's a pleasure to work with Bentham because they have a tremendously robust peer review system. They've got a tremendous number of high quality publications, mainly focusing on the physical and life science, but also some humanities publications as well. Um, Print journals, books, hybrid and open access publications, print and online books, and a great selection of different topics, fields, and disciplines among Bentham's publications. And if you are a librarian joining us today, remember you can just scan the QR code that Professor Dyke has put on the screen here. You can get an absolutely free trial with no commitments to you or your institution for 3 months. So you can try out all of Bentham's high quality and robustly peer-reviewed journals at your institution. And again, there's no obligation whatsoever to you or your institution. So just scan that QR code and the Bentham team will get in touch with you and set you up with an absolutely free trial for 3 months.
It's great. Maybe you know a librarian at your institution. You'll pass the code on to them. We'll show you that again at the end of our session. We've got master's students, PhD students. What else? Let us know as well in the chat, not just where you're from, but the stage of your career that you're at. That helps us a lot with these events when we target content in the future. We can be sure to help you with issues that you face as part of your research career, right, Scott?
Absolutely. And also keep in mind that we will be sending you a full recording of Professor Dyke's talk. You'll get that in your email inbox tomorrow, about 24 hours after the event finishes. We'll also be sending a full certificate of attendance. I know it's very important for many of you who are gathering credentials for your graduation or for your careers. So we will be sending both of those tomorrow, the video and the full certificate. So many thanks to all of you for joining us. Many thanks to our partners and friends at Bentham Science. And many thanks to you, Professor Dyke, for as always sharing your tips. I always learn a million things joining these events with you, so I'm looking forward to this one. And we'll turn it over to you, Professor.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, everybody. Don't be shy in the chat box. Do ask any questions that you might have as we go through our event. Put any comments in there. We usually don't have time to ask you to raise your hands in these webinars because we get so many questions usually, but we always do have time at the end of our time slot with Bentham Science to address all of the questions that you may have. So in our event today, which is all about steps to take as we move around the academic publishing cycle, which you can see here on the screen in front of you. We like to call it the academic hamster wheel. We're going to be talking about planning and journal selection, first of all. Then we're going to talk a little bit about effective research writing. And then thirdly, we'll come back, we'll talk about submission and some tricks for submission and peer review. But if there are other areas of the research cycle that you feel you would like specific help with, do have a look at the Bentham Science YouTube channel where lots of recordings of events like this are available. You can go in, you can have a look at previous events, targeted events, many of them for specific subject areas. So do check out the Bentham Science YouTube after the event today. Lots of content there to help you. So let's begin part one, maximizing impact. We're going to have a quick think about the different kinds of research impact, academic as well as economic and societal impact. So as you do research, as you write up your research papers for publication, we will be thinking and encouraging you to consider how you can maximize your impact. And that's not just which journals you get your work published in, their impact factors and the citations, but also the benefits that your work is going to have, your research is going to have economically and societally in terms of the benefits to ordinary people. And this is important and something that not a lot of researchers spend all that much time thinking about. But of course, publications remain at the heart of impact. We count papers, we look at impact factors, our own H indices, our R indices. Your institution is going to be counting citations, looking at research circulation. But let's ask ourselves, how does our research circulation actually translate to impact? And how many researchers are actually going to be citing your work? So a good choice is a Bentham Science journal because there's a lot of support that you get after your paper gets published in terms of sharing it with the wider community. And this is key. International publishers often reject the work that we do, and there are a number of common problems that top our survey of journal editors. Scott and I talk to journal editors all the time, and they came back with a number of issues that they often find are problematic with incoming submissions outside the scope of the journal. Plagiarism, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, incorrect formatting, poor English writing, we're going to talk about that too in our event today, as well as the kinds of responses that researchers make to comments they receive during peer review. And then the ethical issue of recycling submissions, taking one paper, sending it to another journal when it's been rejected initially. So your science communication skills are also key and something that we spend a lot of time talking about in our events. Why it's important to improve your science communication skills so that you can explain the value and impact of your work, so that you can justify the funding that you've received, perhaps from a government, from your university, from a national funding agency. We're here to help you communicate your research more effectively And you definitely can become better at public engagement and public speaking. If you haven't seen our training event on public speaking and presenting your research, once again, jump on over there to the Bentham Science YouTube channel. There's some great content to help you get better, more effective at communicating your research. So let's dive in. Planning and journal selection at the outset. Scott's going to come back with a quick poll as we start to talk about this as an issue. Journal selection, Scott.
Okay, let's ask a very quick poll or quiz question to our group today. So the question is, why is journal selection so important? Select all that are true. I'll launch the poll here in just a second. So let's take a look at quiz or poll number 1, if you can see it on your screen. So you can choose as many answers here as you like. There's 3 options. So the question is, why is journal selection important? A, it can speed up the publication of your paper. B, it can maximize the impact of your paper. And or C, it helps you detect and avoid fake journals. Please select any and all that you think are true per journal selection. This is something we preach all the time, isn't it, Professor?
Absolutely.
Importance of journal selection.
Yeah, and it's actually not something that researchers do effectively before beginning to write papers. Most people, maybe you feel this is true as you listen to this event, most people do the research, write the paper, and then think about where they're going to send that research. Might be more effective to have a journal in mind as you begin the research writing process.
Absolutely. Let's check the answers to our poll, and I'm going to close the poll here and share the results. So the answer is actually all of these are true for journal selection. You saw in Professor Dyke's slide just previously that sometimes being outside of the aims and scope of the journal can, even if you have a high quality submission, can result in a rejection or desk rejection. So speeding up publication, maximizing impact by choosing the best possible journal, and of course, avoiding fake journals, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So all of these are true, and they're all benefits of journal selection. And Professor Dyke, there are many more benefits to journal selection, aren't there?
Absolutely, absolutely. Most importantly, it really helps you to be effective as you write your paper up. And we'll talk about it in a moment as well. But if you have a journal in mind, then that's going to significantly accelerate your path to successful publication. So that's really important. And that's our first poll. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. Absolutely fantastic. Journal selection, of course, means finding the best possible journal for your research article. It helps you to speed things up, maximize the impact of your publication, and also helps you to detect and avoid fake journals. And what we always do is we encourage people, researchers around the world who attend our training events, to do select a journal or series of journals before you start to write. And that's because every journal's different. What kind of article you're going to write depends on the journal and the kind of length content. We get hundreds of questions from researchers about the specifics of structure in article writing. Well, many of those questions answered for yourself if you've got a journal in mind. You can self-evaluate which journal will be most appropriate for the work that you've done. And of course, we're here to help. Do get in touch if you'd like further information about selecting an appropriate journal. But choosing a journal early, you'll know the aims and scope, you'll know the readership, the disciplines, the topics, the types of articles. You get to know the journal guidelines, even the peer review process. Are you the kind of researcher who would prefer to see your research peer reviewed double blind? Lots of people do. Bentham is a great choice if that's the case, because Bentham Science, every paper that comes into Bentham journals gets peer-reviewed double-blind, which means that you and the editor and the reviewers, don't know each other's identity. The editor sitting in the middle is the only person who knows who's who. And that, people feel, is often perhaps the most fair, the least biased mode of review. So tools for journal selection, Aim high, choose appropriately. We're here to help you to learn how to sell and manage your next submission to an international journal. And we do recommend the EdAnt's Journal Selector tool as really the only currently available publisher independent tool that you can use to search across all of the journals out there listed on Web of Science in order to find a suitable journal for your article. If you go onto a publisher website, they'll give you one of their journals as a place for your next paper. So rules and tools for journal selection. Researchers do tend to think when putting their articles together about impact factor. They do tend to think about reputation, reach within their field, and whether the journal is open access or not. So these are key issues to keep in mind when you select a journal. What's its impact factor? What's its reputation? There are lots of examples of journals that have a great reputation within a field. They've got reach within a particular research field. In medicine, for example, great example, not such a great impact factor, but lots of people in your field are reading those particular journals. And of course, will the journal be open access or not? Effective journal selection is a marriage between research and publication. And here's our quick checklist that you can follow to self-evaluate. When you think, is my article that I'm going to write, is my research good enough for that great Bentham journal? You can use this checklist. How novel is your paper? How good are your methods? Have you minimized biases? Is your study ethically compliant? It certainly should be. If you're not sure what you need to do to make sure that your research is ethically compliant, well, again, Bentham YouTube channel, our fantastic presentation on research and publishing ethics, real world implications, and is your writing highly readable, which of course we're going to talk about in a moment. But quickly, there are traditional journals that publish content behind a subscription paywall. Bentham has 126 of these traditional journals where you can publish for free, but not everybody is going to be able to access your article. That's a traditional journal. Gold open access, on the other hand, is where you publish and your paper is completely accessible for everybody, but there's often a charge for that. Gold open access journals, Bentham's got 40. You can have a look at Bentham Open, see those journals, but you're going to have to pay an article processing charge to put your paper into one of those journals. We call hybrid journals. That's where traditional journals also give you the opportunity to convert your paper to full open access by again paying that dreaded article processing charge. And I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions about this at the end of our event. But green is the third option, and that's where you publish in a traditional journal, one of the Bentham Science journals, for example, but you don't pay an article processing charge. You put a final late stage version of your research onto your own website or onto ResearchGate or onto academia.edu. You've got a late stage version, not the final accepted version that the journal's processed, but a late stage version on a repository. Those are the different kinds of journals in a nutshell. But of course, as you know, listening to this, watch out for fakes, because many open access journals, because of this pay for open access article processing charge model, this has created a big problem in the industry. Many fake journals, predatory journals, they're there to try to cheat you out of your money, out of your funding, and it can often be quite difficult to spot the difference. So we're just going to do a quick poll. Scott's going to come back. We're going to do this just to make sure that you're on top of this particular issue. Scott.
Okay, let's try our second poll question for today. The question is, what are some signs that a journal might be fake? Now, Professor Dyke is going to come back in a minute here and give us some more information on some red flags to look for as you are selecting a journal and you're navigating that open access landscape. But let's try a quick quiz and see how much you actually know already. So again, the question is, what are some signs that a journal might be fake or predatory? For example, A, they are not listed on COPE or DOAJ. The website URL seems a little bit off, or the fees are charged at the time of submission. Any or all of these that you think might be true, that might be red flags that the journal is fake, go ahead and click those and let's see what our audience thinks.
Yeah, COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. If you're not aware of that, go and have a look at that. It's a fantastic resource for all things publication ethics related, as the name suggests. The DOAJ, or the DWAJ as we like to call it, that's the Directory of Open Access Journals. If an open access journal is reputable, then probably it's also on the DWAJ. Scott?
Absolutely. Let's check our poll results here. So, most popular answers listed on those directories, COPE and DWAJ. Website URL, 77% of our guests said that might be a red flag, that the journal is fake, and then fees being charged at the time of submission. Another possible red flag, say 77% of our guests today. So yeah, the answer is actually all of these are potential red flags that open access journal is predatory. Professor, there are other red flags as well. These are just some of them, aren't they?
Yeah, and not every reputable open access journal is in the DOAJ and vice versa. So that might not be the best indicator. We can talk about Beale's list as well, probably in the Q&A a little bit later on, but never pay anything. This is critical. Never pay anything for publication until after your paper has been properly peer reviewed and accepted for publication. Lots of dodgy open access journals ask for fees at various points in the cycle, and that is probably the biggest of the red flags.
And a confusing one as well, going back to that, Professor, is recently predatory conferences as well are on the rise. And of course, even reputable conferences charge an upfront fee to join the conference. So that makes it a bit more confusing. So in addition to predatory journals, there's also predatory conferences now. So we have to be absolutely on the ball as we check those. So back to you, Professor.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's got all that much research money, so you've got to be very, very careful. And we're always here to help. If you have any questions, just drop us a line. We put together this list here. Other things that are problematic, potential markers for journals that might be fake or looking for your money, do have a look at these as well. A real journal, a reputable journal, should be listed in a number of key databases. It should have a robust peer review process. The fees and policies will be fair, clearly listed and explained in detail. The DWAJ, publicationethics.org, is the COPE website. Think, Check, Submit is another great resource. Have a look at. And OASPA. So if you're not aware of these resources, do take a screenshot of this, do have a look at these in the future. And we would also strongly encourage everybody to consider the use of preprint platforms where you can put your research in late stage or whenever you like and register it so that nobody else can gazump you. Nobody else can take your data, take your conclusions and publish it for themselves. Preprints are great places, preprint servers, fantastic ways to keep your work protected. And ORCID ID is also a fantastic idea. If you don't have one yet, do get one. An ORCID ID identifies you, differentiates you from other researchers who may have the same name. Perhaps you've used a range of different versions of your name in your previous publications. Well, having an ORCID ID solves that issue. And often journal websites, publisher websites require you to have an ORCID ID in order to make a submission because it protects them as well as protecting you. Make sure that you are who you say you are. So that's step one. That's part one of our event today. Let's move on into part two and talk a little bit about effective writing. Scott and I have a roadmap for success as a writing and publishing researcher, a writing and publishing academic, many events, lots of training. Do have a look at our website, scitrain.com, if you'd like to learn more about the work that we do with Bentham and other publishers, preparing to write, selling yourself, structuring your writing and being effective, following simple rules that can make a huge difference in the way that you put your research out there into the wider world, maximizing your message. Before you start to write, please have a think about what your message is, what the takeaway from your research is going to be, what the key thing that you want people to remember from your article when they read it, the message, the audience, that's the journal that you choose to publish in. A great idea to have that lined up before you start to write, because of course that gives you the third thing, the structure, message, audience, and structure. Fantastic to have these in mind before you start to write. Really accelerates the writing and publishing process. And then, of course, as many of our colleagues joining this event will not be native English speakers, you need to be like Arnold in the middle of the slide. He's also a famous non-native English speaker, and when he puts together an academic research article, he is a bricklayer. You need a plan, you need a structure, you need to make sure you know what you're going to put into the different parts of your article before you write it. And the best way to do that is, of course, to have a journal in mind before you begin. And with that in mind, we draw your attention to the famous IMRAD academic article structure, because of course, IMRAD for STM, Science, Technology, Medicine and Mathematics articles is usual in the structure of the article, with the title and abstract, the introduction, methods, results and discussion, hence the acronym IMRAD. And people tend, as you'll know yourself, to read research articles in the IMRAD sequence. They start at the beginning, they continue until they get to the end, or they read the title and the abstract and then they stop. You should seriously consider putting your paper together in what we like to call the right order, rather than starting at the beginning, carrying on until you get to the end. That's not the most effective way to put a research paper together. And the reason for that is usually, of course, we've done the results, we've collected the data, we've performed our methods. Before we begin to write, we already know the methods because we've just done the work. We also have the results in hand. We've collected them, we're ready to go. So when you start to write a paper, you've got your journal in mind because you know your message, you know what the takeaway is from the research. You can already do the methods and the results. So it really is much better to put your article together in what we like to call the right order, rather than starting at the beginning, carrying on until you get to the end, like Alice in Wonderland. That's not what you want to do when you put your paper together. Methods and results to begin with, followed by the discussion, introduction, title and abstract usually are written at the end of the process. But also, when we talk to researchers, they often ask us as well, which tense should I use in which section? Well, usually, most of the time, in most sections of your article, keep it simple. Don't get tense, keep it simple. Present tense, simple tense for most parts of your research paper, the introduction, the discussion, the results, but the methods and many parts of the results will be written in the past tense. So do have a look at this table. It's a summary of the most common parts of the research paper, the most common tenses that get used in those sections. It's better, simpler, more effective to keep your research simple. As you drill down on your research question, you're going to let your reader know what you're working on. Set up that expectation for the rest of the article using explicit phrases, question words, what's your hypothesis, and identifying the types of variables and study design in your research paper. And we do spend an awful lot of time, Scott and I, presenting on clear writing techniques, signaling a consistent order, repeating those key terms, keeping a consistent point of view, putting your parallel ideas in parallel forms and topic sentences. And if you'd like more information about effective writing, once again, let me refer you to the Bentham Science YouTube channel, where lots of content on effective writing is to be found. But of course, Writing in English, if it's not your first language, is tricky, but we do recommend that you try to do it often, a little bit every day, 5 minutes, a few sentences. Try to think about your research in English rather than in your native language and then translating in your head. Think in English, write as you think, and you can edit later. If you translate, though, do find a subject area specialist because, of course, lots of subject specific information can get lost in translation. And our best tip, our top tip for effective writing is to copy the style of papers you like and respect in your field, because English should be simple in academic writing. One complex idea per sentence, short sentences. On average, we reckon around 20 words is best for a short English language effective sentence. You want to keep the verb and subject close together. We measured favor the active voice rather than the passive voice. We concluded no unnecessary adjectives, avoid jargon, and of course, no double negatives. Basics of plain English. There are common mistakes that people tend to make, like plagiarism by mistake, plagiarism by accident, the use of tenses and switches, spelling conventions, and of course, inappropriate word use, keeping it too complicated, using words that people will not recognize from their everyday life in your scientific writing. And so these could include emotional words, superlatives. In my field, paleontology is a big field for superlatives. The most amazing, the most magnificent dinosaur, gigantic, earth-shattering. Xavier, listening to this, will testify to that, I'm sure. Avoiding common modifiers, very much more, vastly, greatly, and contractions. Informal in English. So you don't want to use contractions like these in your English writing, and in your references too. Avoid direct quotes unless you're presenting another author's specific definition or original label. Paraphrase rather than direct quotes because they're quite hard to read as well. If you're scanning through a document, lots of quotes makes it tough to follow. And don't forget to read and reread your references. You do want to make sure that what you're citing in your paper you have actually read. And let's have a quick look at plagiarism. Scott's going to be back for this, but the question here is very important. Scott.
Right. This is a topic that confused me a lot when I was a graduate student, and it's a question that we often still get from guests at our events. So the question is, can I plagiarize myself? It seems like almost a strange concept, doesn't it? So is it possible to self-plagiarize when you are writing a paper? So let's launch our poll here and see what our guests think. What do you think? Is it possible to plagiarize yourself? A, ridiculous. How can I steal something that I wrote? Or B, definitely, it is possible to plagiarize oneself. Let's see what our guests think today.
This is a great one because when you make something like a figure or a table or a map, you think, of course, I made that. That's mine, Really important to get this right.
I think it's even more important for someone such as yourself, unlike myself, but someone such as yourself, Professor, who's very well published, and you have a lot of papers, on your CV, and so you actually do have a lot of chances or opportunities to potentially cite yourself. So let's see what the answer is to this. We're going to end the poll here, and so it looks like 17% of our guests feel like this is a ridiculous idea. 83% said it is possible. Professor, what's the correct answer here? Is it possible to plagiarize yourself?
Well, absolutely. Unfortunately, yes, it is very possible to plagiarize yourself if you've published something, even if you've published something in an open access journal, and we'll talk about copyright, I'm sure, a little bit later on. But yes, if you've published something anywhere in your thesis, in a book, in a previously peer-reviewed paper, you must cite that when you republish it again, right?
Right. It's an interesting concept to wrap our heads around because we have to remember that the copyrights may not necessarily be owned by ourselves. Even if we wrote it and devised that research study and wrote about it, the copyright now often belongs to someone else, depending on how you've published it. So very important to quote yourself, cite yourself, and remember also where copyrights might lay.
It's a tricky one. In open access publishing, almost always you retain the copyright. That's part of the
Exactly.
point of open access publishing, but you still need to cite yourself, even if you've published something before. So very important. Publishers will check this. You can get in trouble if you don't. So don't commit self-plagiarism is the key takeaway from this section of our presentation. What is that? Well, it means to republish your own previously published text, papers, or research results as if they were brand new. So don't reuse a data set from a previous study without making your readers aware. Don't submit a paper containing data that you've already published. You must cite. We're getting slightly into the ethical considerations here. Do have a listen to our other presentations on research and publishing ethics, Bentham YouTube, and don't submit multiple papers about the same study to different journals. That's a big no. You shouldn't be doing that. That's really a violation of ethics. Great. Okay, so far we've talked about planning and journal selection, effective research writing. Of course, these are just tasters of the content that we have, Scott and I. So do listen to the Bentham YouTube, as I've mentioned several times. Do get in touch with us if you'd like us to come to your institution and do a longer presentation on any of these issues. But thirdly, part three of our event, part three of our event today, let's talk a little bit about submission and peer review. Very confusing, often, especially for researchers coming into the publishing landscape for the first time. Who's who in publishing? And so we put together this handy field guide, journal editors, academic editors, language editors, and you, the author. As a researcher, you're most likely to initially interact with an academic editor who will decide whether your paper is good enough or not to be sent out for peer review. Sitting above that person will be a journal managing editor. You may also interact with someone who works on your language, which we call a language editor. Confusing because the word editor in English can, of course, have several different meanings. But initially, when your paper goes into the journal submission system, a desk editor, a subject editor is going to decide whether your paper should be sent for peer review or not. Does the article match the journal scope? Is the message clear? And that's the reason that we encourage you, before you start to write, to think about your message. Is the work important? Is it original? Is it true? And is it relevant to the readers of the journal? And the higher the impact factor, the more likely you are to get initially desk rejected. And so for that reason, when selecting a journal, we would also recommend that you have a look at the use of pre-submission inquiries, right, Scott? Maybe many of our audience members have not come across these before. Pre-submission inquiries.
Well, this was a secret weapon that I learned about from you, Professor. It's a great way to, first let's try our poll and just see what our audience thinks about pre-submission inquiries. So we'll go to our poll number 4. The question is it wrong and unethical? Excuse me, is it wrong and unethical to send pre-submission inquiries to several journals at a time? If you think that this is true, you should not send more than one, then click true. Or if you think this statement is false, that you can send as many inquiries as you like, pre-submission inquiries that is, then click B, false. Let's see what our audience thinks.
These are a bit of a secret weapon, absolutely, because, writing to editors, communicating with journal editors before you've even made a submission is something that lots of researchers often are unaware that they can even actually do, we find.
Okay, let's end our poll and see what our audience thinks. So 67% of guests said that it's not ethical to send more than one pre-submission inquiry at a time. And then 33% of our guests said that you can send as many as you like. Professor, what's the correct answer here?
Well, of course, actually, Not, of course, maybe you were unaware of this, but there's no limit to the number of pre-submission inquiries that you can send. You can pick a list of 20 journals that could be suitable for your next paper and send an email to all of them saying, would you be interested in seeing a submission from us, from our research team, from me on this particular topic? And in fact, higher impact factor journals encourage you to do this. Journal editors will always appreciate the fact that you've done this. It saves everybody time. And of course, you get into the mind of the editor if you do this. If they say, great, sounds good, we'd love to see that submission coming into our journal. When you do make the submission, you're already in the head of the editor. So no limit, write to as many editors as you like. This helps you target a journal effectively. You can use your abstract, you can use a title, reach out with that information in advance even of writing the paper. And we'll give you an email template that you can use at the end of this event as a special bonus, as a thank you for attending this SciTrain Bentham event today. Now, let's have a quick look at cover letters because, of course, journal editors love these. They read them, they use them, they do interact with your cover letter, and many authors don't bother to write a good one when they make a submission to a journal. This is the worst kind of cover letter. No cover letter at all. Very, very common. People make submissions to journals. They don't tell the editor any information about why they should be looking at this paper seriously for consideration in their journal. Don't fall into that trap. Also, don't fall into the trap of writing a boring one like this example. Please find our paper enclosed, which we hope you'll find interesting. It is a waste of everybody's time, and we've all been there. It's 5 minutes before the end of the day. We want to get the paper submitted. We want to get out the door. We put the paper in with something like this. It's a waste of time. What you need is a good, effective cover letter that tells the editor why they should seriously consider your paper for peer review, why it's a good fit for their journal, and who you would like to suggest as potential peer reviewers. The editor might not use your suggestions. They might not be allowed to use your suggestions. Many publishers do not let editors select peer reviewers, especially peer reviewers suggested by authors, but many publishers do, and you should always have some suggestions in your cover letter to be on the safe side. Make sure that you get them in. Maximize your chances of success. That's what this is all about. The cover letter is one of the first sections of a paper that an editor's going to read, so make it count. Why is your topic important? Why are your results significant? What's the key result? The message, the breakthrough. Why is this an advance on previous work? Why this journal? And who do you suggest to peer review the paper? We'll give you a template for a cover letter as well. But overall, in the publication process, how you communicate with editors as a researcher, as an author, is key. Hi, where's my paper? I've waited 2 months. Looking forward to an immediate reply is not a good way to communicate with an editor, because many editors at academic journals are busy academics with other jobs as well as their journal editorial work. You've got to be polite. You've got to be forthcoming. You've got to help them do their job by providing them with further information. I'm writing to ask if I can do something to help speed up my recent submission to your journal. May I make some suggestions for additional peer reviewers? Is a good way to ask the same question, where's my paper, right, as the first example. But the way you communicate with journal editors is important, because if you make them feel good, if you make them feel valued, if you help them with their work, you are obviously going to get probably a more favorable, faster response about your paper. So what we've done is we've put a few responses together here. It's the same with peer review, by the way. Make sure editors and peer reviewers feel good about your responses. If they feel good, then they're going to be more likely to give your article a positive review. We'd like to thank the reviewer. where the reviewer has correctly pointed out. We acknowledge that. We concur. Good and positive ways to use language to make the peer reviewers feel good rather than we simply do not have data. I do not think the reviewers understand my point. It is not necessary to change the reviewer's suggestion. It's not going to make a good impression. It's better to be positive with your language, positive with the way that you communicate. That way, editors and peer reviewers, who, by the way, very often get at least one additional opportunity to look at your paper after their first review, makes them feel good. They're more likely to give you an effective response, a positive response. We would like to thank the 2 reviewers who worked on our paper for their considerable efforts and for the time they devoted to our work. We've made almost all the changes requested and enclose a revised manuscript. You can see the changes that we've made in red. Our responses received in review are summarized, interleaved in red. This is how you effectively respond to review comments. Maybe the editor won't read them all, but that doesn't matter. At least you're showing that you've taken the process seriously. You are doing all of the comments that you're being asked to look at. We'd like to thank you for this editorial comment. We've reworked all our analyses. We've corrected our paper. Great responses, makes everybody feel good, improves your chances of your paper being successfully published in the journal. And of course, what about rejection? Don't worry if you get rejected. This is very common, especially pre-peer review. You can always appeal if you genuinely think that your research was important, well done, well written, and deserves to reach the journal's audience. It's always worth an appeal, because if your paper's been rejected, the worst thing that can happen, of course, is that it's going to stay rejected. So if you feel unfairly treated by a journal, very important to put that into writing. We can help you with that if you like. Send that back to the journal, write an appeal, be confident and believe in your work, because very often journals might reject articles. You may have good responses. Write to the editor, make an appeal. Maybe they'll put the paper back into peer review. It's always worth doing. It always can help, because, as I mentioned already, the worst thing that can happen, of course, is that your paper will stay rejected. Above all, as Scott will attest, communication is key. We are here to help you maximize your success. Make sure your papers have the best possible chance of acceptance in those international journals. And if you have any questions about what we've talked about today, or any of the other content issues that we've raised in this webinar and others, now is your chance to get in touch. Scott.
Professor, thanks so much for sharing your insights as always. And we've got some great questions from our guests today. We covered a lot. We went through basically the whole planning, writing, and submission process from top to bottom. So there's a lot here to digest and to go through. So if you were not able to catch anything in Professor Dyke's talk today, don't worry, we will send you the full recording tomorrow with transcript. You can search through that. It's very convenient. So don't worry if you missed anything. But if you do have any questions, now is the time. And we have some questions coming in already. Gareth, would you mind if I just pitched you a couple of questions from our guests now?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. We've got lots of time left. I see you've already answered the where can I find the EdAnts tool? It's tricky to find, but there's the link.
Yeah, and we are getting some reports that sometimes the tool has some limitations. So, but I would just suggest trying it. I did test it again earlier today, and I was able to get reliable results from the journal selector tool. So your mileage may vary, but give it a try. And if you hear any, if you experience any setbacks, just let us know. But that's the link there. And so good luck with the journal selector tool. And some other questions from our guests today. I'll see if I can field any of these. One question is, how long should a cover letter be? That's a great question. I think if you went back to Professor Dyke's slide on cover letters, I think it was slide 49. As long as you answer most of those questions here on the next slide, slide 49, I think. Well, maybe here it's this one, 52. Thank you. 52, you had that. Perfect. I think this is the one. If you can answer the questions that Professor Dyke has posted here in the most concise way, then I think you're off to a running start. Professor, what are your thoughts on, as a journal editor who reads cover letters all the time, what are your thoughts on the optimum length
Oh, it's a
for
great
a cover
question.
letter?
It's a great question. There are no guidelines from the journal on this, but shorter is obviously going to be better than, hundreds and hundreds of pages. So, yeah, as Scott said, tell the editor why this is an important piece of research, what the takeaway is, why it's a breakthrough, and why it should be a good fit for this journal. We do get lots of cover letters where the authors have obviously recycled the cover letter from a previous submission. So we're sitting at historical biology. We're getting cover letters that say, we'd like to submit this paper to Nature or Science. That's a big giveaway that we're not your first choice. And we don't want that. We want to make everybody feel that they're our first choice, even if they're not, right? There's no reason why you can't take the time to change the name of the journal in your cover letter.
Absolutely. And we will send you the template for our cover letter together with the pre-submission inquiry template. So please take Professor Dyke's advice and make sure that you change that template and you check it carefully before sending to any journal. It's also a good idea to get the journal editor's name correct. Same thing if you send a cover letter to a journal and maybe you get the journal name correct and you've updated that for your second choice journal, but you forgot to update the editor's name. Well, that's even worse, isn't it?
Yeah, but it happens all the time, especially like cover letters with no information in them. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Okay, excellent question. Thank you. Some other excellent questions here. Some of them, well, might be beyond the scope of our talk today, but maybe we can ask your advice, Professor Dyke, on some of these. So this is a great question. I've been advised against using I or we in my scientific research paper, but I often found similar papers that use these first person pronouns. I'm curious as to what you might think of this. This is an excellent question because we also preach of avoiding using the passive voice. So if you use first person pronouns like we studied, we measured, great. But at the same time, we tell people, well, try not to use too many I or we personal pronouns, but then that forces you to use passive verbs. Something was studied, something was measured. So I guess the short answer is a balance of the two. Obviously, check other papers that have been published successfully in that journal and see what kinds of style they use. So I guess it is a bit of a balancing act between using active verbs with I or we and then using passive verbs that don't use I or we. Professor, any thoughts on this very grammatical question?
It's a fantastic question, and we get it a lot because, of course, I was taught when I was a school kid writing up my science experiments, as many people have been, even into universities and into their research careers, that science research, you use the third person. But that's not what journals want to see. If you look at the style guides for almost all international journals, and we can back this up, we can send these to you after the event if you really want. They want you, where possible, to use the first person, the active voice. So yes, Izzy, you've been advised against doing it, but journals and publishers want you to do it. And the work that's been done on this, breaking down the content of academic papers, usually it's about 70 to 80% of a paper in the first person. And there are, of course, sections, as Scott mentioned, where you want to write in the third person. So you use a mixture of both, especially if you have to paraphrase from a previous study or talk about your methods, things like that. But where possible, the active voice. If you don't believe me, go grab a copy of Nature or Science. Go have a look at the end of the introduction. There's always a couple of sentences at the end of the introduction. Every Nature paper in this study, we show, and that's what Nature editors are taught to put in to the papers. First person. Thank you for the fantastic question.
That's a great question. So there you go, a balance of very roughly 80-20 first person to passive. Excellent question. Another question, this might be a tough question, but it's a great question, I think, and it's an important one. Our guest asks, is impact factor really necessary for a specific work? And this author, just to paraphrase, is saying that many journals were not, impact factor journals were not interested in this particular study that they had done. And so this author ended up publishing in a non-impact factor journal. So this is a great question. If you are not able to publish your paper in an impact factor journal, does that limit the overall impact of your paper? There are other ways to generate impact from your paper, aren't there, Professor?
Yeah, I mean, impact factor journals, that just means that more people are going to be reading the journal article. A journal with a higher impact factor just has a higher readership and therefore citations, just because it has a bigger reputation, a larger circulation. But of course, as Scott said, you can promote your paper after publication, especially if it's in an open access journal. Anyone can download it, anyone can read it. So no, the answer to your question is, of course, publish in a journal that's peer reviewed, that's reputable. You can then, of course, do lots of things, adopt a range of strategies to promote your paper widely after publication. Blog about it, put it on social media, make videos, make podcasts, put it out there as much as possible. More people are going to see it, more people are going to read it and cite it, and then its citation will increase, and that'll be good for the journal as well. So yeah, another great question. Thank you for that.
Fantastic question. Of course, Bentham has a number of impact factor journals. So if you're not accepted by one of those journals and you go with a second or third choice, there are ways to promote that paper and to increase its overall impact. Thank you, Professor. A great question here as well. This is oh, I feel for this person. So this person, our guest asks, I was awarded my PhD in 2021, botany and nanotechnology. Wow, fantastic. Congratulations. But from then, didn't get any research opportunities until now. Can you show me the way about, wow, navigating postdoc life? This is such a tough question, isn't it, Professor? Any advice for
Wow.
postdocs that are out there looking for research work?
Oh, that's the most difficult stage of the research journey, the research career. Your most difficult stage, probably that uncertain stage between doing your PhD and hopefully getting that full-time job. What we can do in this particular situation is direct you to a number of great websites, great resources where people are providing specifically that kind of direct advice. So do connect with me or Scott, like maybe on LinkedIn or over email after the event. And what we'll do is we'll put you in touch with people who are daily providing helpful tips and content around that particular topic. So it's a great question. Thank you so much for that question.
It's a great question and best of luck. And feel free to reply to the email that we'll send you tomorrow. That way you'll have our email address and you can post us your question and we can try to direct you to some resources to help you with finding that postdoc position. Yeah. Fantastic. There are so many other great questions here. Maybe we can squeeze in just one more, Professor, if we have time. And again,
Of
apologies
course,
if we didn't get to
absolutely.
your question today, then we apologize, but feel free to reach out to us by email. And here's a question from our guest who asks, if the manuscript is rejected at the very early stage, not due to not aligning with the scope, I assume that means desk rejection, can we submit the exact same manuscript to other journals without altering anything, title, abstracts, etc.? Thank you in advance for your answer. Okay, great question. So after desk rejection, is it safe, Professor, to take that manuscript and then just resubmit verbatim to other journals? Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
yeah. I mean, within the scope. I mean, yeah. Make sure that your next journal doesn't have different formatting requirements, article length requirements, for example. But yeah, in theory, the answer to that question is yes. But you may have to do some things to the paper to change it to align with the formatting requirements, the structural requirements, the length requirements of your next journal. So yes, but check. Great question.
Check, revise if necessary. And as Professor Dyke always says, make sure you update that cover letter to the new journal and the new
Exactly. Yeah, there you
journal
go.
editor's name. Don't miss that important step.
Yep. Fantastic.
Excellent question. Well, I think we're almost out of time today and some great questions today, some great engagement in the chat. Thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts and letting us know how you're getting on with your research. and for letting us know your pain points and things that are giving you some trouble as you navigate research life from top to bottom. Thank you so much, Professor, as always, for your insights as an author, as an editor. We really appreciate it. And we'll send the recording of Professor Dyke's talk to everyone tomorrow. Usually goes out about 24 hours after the event finishes. So check your inbox for that. We'll send you the 2 templates that Gareth mentioned, the pre-submission inquiry template and his extra special cover letter template. Again, don't forget to update that depending on the journal and editor you're sending it to. And thanks everyone so much for joining us. Professor Dyke, any final thoughts before we finish today?
Don't forget to follow Bentham Science on all of their various different social media channels. Don't forget to have a look at that QR code that we showed you at the beginning of the event. If you know a librarian, contact a librarian, do send that off as well. Thank you for the comments, everybody. Thank you for the engagement. Thank you, Scott, for being here as always for our events. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
And thanks to Bentham Science for sponsoring this event. And best of luck to everyone with all of your research activities. And thank you again, Gareth, for your time today.